So Arthur Morgan, right? If you've played Red Dead Redemption 2, you know. This character he gets under your skin in a way that most video game protagonists don't. And I've been thinking about why that is. Like, what is it about Arthur that makes his story hit so damn hard? And I realized it's because he's one of the most psychologically complex characters in gaming, period. Today, we're doing a full psychological breakdown of Arthur Morgan. We're going deep into his trauma, his self-worth issues, his relationships, all of it. And I'm using actual psychological frameworks here, not just, oh, he's sad, surface level stuff. We're talking about complex PTSD, moral injury, attachment disorders, the whole deal. I'm gonna rate each psychological trait on a severity level from 1 to 5. Level 1 being mild, barely there, level 5 being as severe as it gets. This is gonna be a long one. So get comfortable because we're about to dissect what makes Arthur Morgan one of the most tragically human characters ever written. Let's go. Part 1, low self-esteem. Alright, so let's start with the big one. Arthur Morgan has absolutely terrible self-esteem. And I'm not talking about occasional self-doubt. I'm talking about a deep, fundamental belief that he is worthless as a human being. Severity level, 4.5 out of 5. This is really bad. Now, where does this come from? Well, let's go back to the beginning. Arthur's childhood was a nightmare. His father was abusive and neglectful. His mother died when he was young. He was essentially abandoned by both of his biological parents, and then Dutch and Hosea found him. But here's the thing. They didn't take him in because they saw a lost child who needed love. They took him in because they saw potential. They saw a kid who could be molded into a useful member of their gang, a thief, an enforcer, someone who could help them survive. From the very start, Arthur's worth was tied to his utility, not to who he was as a person, but what he could do. And that messes you up. When your value as a human being is conditional from childhood, when you're only loved because you're useful, you internalize that. You start to believe that's all you are. And you can see this throughout the entire game. Dutch's love for Arthur is always transactional. Be loyal, be useful, never question me. And Arthur, he drinks that Kool-Aid completely. He builds his entire identity around being Dutch's right-hand man, around serving the gang, around being the guy who gets things done. But then, things start to fall apart. Dutch starts making increasingly terrible decisions, and Arthur starts questioning him. And when he does that, he doesn't just feel conflicted about the gang, he feels unworthy of belonging anywhere. Because if he's not Dutch's loyal enforcer, then what is he? Who is he? In his mind, he's nothing. Part 2, the Isaac wound. Now let's talk about Isaac, because this is the wound that never heals for Arthur. So for those who might have missed it, Arthur had a son, Isaac, and a woman he loved, Eliza, and he abandoned them. He was off doing gang stuff, living the outlaw life, and he wasn't there for them. And then, they died, killed during a robbery while Arthur was out making money for Dutch. And here's what destroys Arthur about this. He became his father, the man he hated, the man who abandoned him. Arthur did the exact same thing to his own son. He repeated the cycle. This isn't just regret. This isn't just, oh, I wish I'd made different choices. This is proof in Arthur's mind that he is fundamentally, irredeemably flawed, that he's cursed to hurt everyone he loves, that he's incapable of being a good person. You can see it in his journal entries. He calls himself no good over and over. He talks about how he's done nothing but harm in his life. When he talks about Isaac, there's this raw self-hatred that just pours out of him, and this affects everything. Every relationship, every choice, because he doesn't believe he deserves love. He doesn't believe he deserves a normal life. He doesn't believe he deserves redemption. Which brings us to his behavior with women in the gang. Mary Beth clearly has feelings for him. And Arthur? He deflects. He uses humor. He changes the subject. He keeps everyone at arm's length because he genuinely doesn't believe he's worthy of being loved. This is textbook low self-worth behavior. When someone offers you genuine affection and your first instinct is, no, you don't understand, I'm not good enough for that. That's not humility. That's a deeply ingrained belief that you don't deserve good things. And Arthur's entire redemption arc in the later chapters, it's not just about doing good. It's about trying to earn the right to die with dignity. He doesn't believe he's inherently good. He has to prove he can be good, even if it costs him everything. That's what makes it so tragic. He's fighting for redemption because he believes he's fundamentally unworthy of it. Part 3. Complex PTSD. Alright, now we need to talk about trauma, because Arthur Morgan is walking, talking complex PTSD. Severity level, 4.5 out of 5. Now PTSD is what you get from a single traumatic event. Complex PTSD is what happens when you experience chronic, repeated trauma over years. Usually in childhood, usually in situations where you can't escape. Sound familiar? Arthur grew up in a violent, unstable environment. He was raised by outlaws. He's been killing people since he was basically a kid. He's witnessed countless deaths. He's lost people he loved. Hosea, Lenny, his son Isaac. The list goes on, and this isn't like one bad thing happened and then life got better. This is decades of constant violence, constant danger, constant loss. His entire adult life has been one long string of traumatic events with no time to process or heal from any of them. So what does complex PTSD look like in Arthur? Let me break it down. First, emotional dysregulation. Arthur has these intense mood swings. He'll be calm one moment, then explode in anger the next, and then immediately after, he feels guilty about it. You see this especially in camp interactions. Someone says the wrong thing and Arthur just snaps, and then 5 minutes later he's apologizing or withdrawing. Second, persistent feelings of shame and worthlessness. We already talked about this, but it ties directly into the CPTSD. He constantly tells himself he's done so much bad. His journal is full of self-flagellation. This isn't just low self-esteem, this is a trauma response. He genuinely believes he's fundamentally damaged. Third, difficulty trusting people outside his immediate circle. Arthur is loyal to a fault with the gang, but with outsiders, he's suspicious, guarded, always waiting for the betrayal, and honestly, given his life experiences, can you blame him? Fourth, hypervigilance. Arthur is always scanning for threats, always ready for a fight. He can't relax. Even in camp, supposedly safe, he's on edge. That's not just being careful. That's a nervous system that's been stuck in fight or flight mode for 30 years. And fifth, intrusive memories and nightmares. This gets worse after his tuberculosis diagnosis, but it's there throughout the game. He has flashbacks, he dreams about Isaac, about the people he's killed, about the things he's done. The TB diagnosis is almost like it breaks down the walls he's built to keep all this trauma compartmentalized. Suddenly, he can't just push it down and keep moving forward. He has to confront it, and it nearly breaks him. Part 4, Moral Injury, when your soul breaks. Now we're getting into the really heavy stuff. Moral injury, severity level, 5 out of 5. This is maxed out. This is Arthur's core psychological wound, and it's what drives his entire character arc. So what is moral injury? It's what happens when you violate your own ethical code, or when you witness deep injustice that goes against everything you believe in. It's different from PTSD because it's specifically about betraying your own values, and it can be absolutely devastating. Arthur spent his entire life following Dutch. He believed in Dutch's ideology, that they were Robin Hood types, stealing from the rich, living free, helping the downtrodden. He justified every terrible thing he did because he thought it served a greater purpose. And then, he realizes it was all a lie. Dutch isn't a revolutionary, he's a narcissist. The plan was always bullshit. They weren't helping anyone, they were just surviving and hurting a lot of innocent people along the way. And Arthur was complicit in all of it. That realization, that's moral injury. His entire worldview, his entire identity, everything he built his life around, it collapses. And he's left staring at decades of violence and wondering what it was all for. You see this progression throughout the game. Early on, Arthur justifies everything. We're outlaws, this is what we do. But as things get worse, as Dutch's decisions become more unhinged, Arthur starts questioning. He can't stomach one more senseless death in the name of Dutch's ego. His journal entries in the later chapters are absolutely gutting. I gave my life to a dream, and the dream's a lie. That's not just disillusionment, that's a man whose entire sense of purpose has been shattered. And that's why his final chapters are so focused on protecting John and his family, because Arthur needs to believe that something good can come from all this, that his life meant something, that he can leave behind at least one good thing before he dies. This isn't just guilt. Guilt is, I did a bad thing. Moral injury is, I've lived my entire life in service of evil, and I didn't even realize it until it was too late. That's what makes Arthur's story so tragic. He didn't just lose his life, he lost his entire sense of self. Part 5, Attachment Disorder, The Broken Family. Alright, let's talk about how Arthur relates to other people, because his attachment style is complicated. Severity level, 3.5 out of 5. So attachment theory is about how we form bonds with other people, and it's shaped primarily by our early relationships with caregivers. If you have secure attachment, you trust people, you form healthy relationships, you don't freak out when people leave or get close. Arthur, yeah, he doesn't have that. His primary attachment figure was Dutch, not his biological parents who abandoned him, Dutch. And Dutch is a terrible person to base your attachment style on because his love is completely conditional and manipulative. Dutch offered Arthur family, belonging, purpose, but only as long as Arthur stayed loyal and useful. That creates what's called disorganized or anxious attachment. You desperately crave connection, but you also fear abandonment and betrayal. So you end up in this cycle of clinging too hard and then pushing people away. And you see this pattern throughout Arthur's relationships. With the gang, he's fiercely loyal, almost pathologically loyal. Even when Dutch is clearly losing it, Arthur struggles to leave because the gang is his family. It's all he has. The thought of losing that, of being alone, it terrifies him on a level he can't even articulate. But at the same time, he struggles to form healthy bonds outside that structure. His romantic relationships are either transactional or fleeting. Mary was the love of his life, but he pushed her away. Mary Beth shows interest and he deflects. He doesn't know how to have a relationship that isn't defined by loyalty to the gang. The one relationship that really works is with John, and even that is complicated. There's genuine love there, genuine brotherhood, but there's also rivalry, resentment, guilt. Arthur sees John as both a brother and a reminder of his own failures. He projects his guilt about Isaac onto Jack. He's determined to save John's family because he couldn't save his own. And then there's Charles, the Marstons, the vulnerable members of the gang like Tilly and Mary Beth. Arthur is protective of them, but in a very specific way. He's trying to do right by them. He's trying to be the person he wishes he'd been for Isaac and Eliza. It's not that Arthur can't form connections, he can, but they're always filtered through this lens of the gang's toxic family structure. He doesn't know how to just be with people, to have relationships that aren't built on loyalty or guilt or trying to make up for past failures. And honestly, that's heartbreaking because you can see that Arthur wants genuine connection. He wants family, he wants love, but he has no template for what healthy attachment looks like. All he knows is the dysfunctional, conditional love Dutch taught him. Part 6, Existential Crisis, Confronting Mortality. Now let's talk about what happens when Arthur gets diagnosed with tuberculosis, because this is where everything comes to a head. Severity level, 4 out of 5. When Arthur finds out he's dying, it triggers a massive existential crisis. And I mean that in the philosophical sense. He's forced to confront the fundamental questions of existence. What was my life for? What do I leave behind? Does any of this matter? You can track this through his journal. Early in the game, Arthur doesn't really reflect much. He's in survival mode, just doing what needs to be done. But after the diagnosis, the journal becomes this space for deep philosophical questioning. All of this is nothing. That's a direct quote. He's grappling with the meaninglessness of his life. 30-some years of violence and crime, and for what? For a dream that turned out to be a lie, for a family that's falling apart. This is what psychologists call existential depression. It's not clinical depression in the traditional sense. It's a profound loss of meaning and purpose. A confrontation with mortality that makes you question everything you thought you knew about your life. And you see how Arthur responds to this. He withdraws from his old habits. He drinks less. He's less likely to engage in random violence. He becomes more contemplative, more thoughtful. He starts helping strangers for no reason other than it feels like the right thing to do. This is Arthur searching for meaning, searching for something that will make his life matter before it's over. He can't change the past, but maybe he can leave behind something good. Maybe he can die knowing he did something right. The stranger missions in the later chapters really highlight this. Helping the widow, building the house with the veteran. These aren't just side quests, they're Arthur desperately trying to create positive meaning in the time he has left. And here's what makes this so powerful. Arthur isn't looking for religious redemption. He's not trying to get into heaven or anything like that. He's looking for, I don't know how to describe it. Personal redemption, the ability to look himself in the mirror and see someone who tried to be good even if he failed most of his life. This is a man confronting his own mortality and realizing that he has so much to regret. And instead of just giving up, he's fighting to make the end of his story different from the beginning and middle. He's fighting to transform his guilt into something that actually helps people. That's incredibly human and incredibly tragic because he's running out of time. Part 7, Substance Use, Numbing the Pain. Alright, quick one here. Arthur drinks a lot, especially early in the game. Severity level 3 out of 5. Now, I wouldn't say Arthur is an alcoholic in the clinical sense, but he definitely uses alcohol as a coping mechanism. And that's significant. When you're dealing with trauma, guilt, grief, anxiety, when you're dealing with all the psychological stuff we've been talking about, substances become a way to numb that pain, to not feel it for a while, to escape. And early Arthur, he drinks to avoid thinking about his life, to avoid confronting his feelings about Dutch, about the gang, about Isaac. It's classic avoidance behavior. But here's what's interesting. As Arthur becomes more reflective, especially after the TB diagnosis, he drinks less. You can actually track this through gameplay. Later chapters, Arthur is more likely to decline drinks, more likely to stay sober. That's not just a character detail, that's emotional growth. He's confronting his feelings instead of numbing them. He's dealing with his pain instead of drowning it in whiskey. This shows a level of psychological maturity that Arthur didn't have at the beginning of the game. He's facing his demons head on, even though it's painful, even though it would be easier to just stay drunk and not think about it. Part 8. What Arthur doesn't have. Alright, now I want to talk about what Arthur isn't, because there are some common misconceptions about his psychology that need to be cleared up. Arthur does not have antisocial personality disorder. This is important. ASPD is what we used to call sociopathy or psychopathy. It's characterized by a complete lack of empathy, remorse, or moral feeling. People with ASPD genuinely don't care about hurting others. That's not Arthur at all. Arthur shows consistent empathy throughout the game. He feels remorse. He has a moral compass, even if it's been twisted by his upbringing. The whole point of his character arc is that he does care deeply, and that caring is what's tearing him apart. He's not a narcissist either. Narcissists have an inflated sense of self-importance and a need for admiration. Arthur has the exact opposite. He thinks he's worthless. He doesn't want praise or recognition. He just wants to do right before he dies. And he's not psychotic. He's not detached from reality. He doesn't have delusions or hallucinations. He's depressed, traumatized, and having an existential crisis, but he's firmly grounded in reality. Painfully so, actually. These distinctions matter because Arthur's psychology is specifically about guilt, trauma, and the search for redemption. He's not a monster or a madman. He's a deeply damaged person trying to become better, and that's what makes his story so compelling. Part 9. The overall picture. So let's step back and look at Arthur Morgan's complete psychological profile. He's a man shaped by abandonment, chronic trauma, and misplaced loyalty. His core wound is the belief that he is fundamentally unworthy of love or redemption. Everything he does is filtered through that belief. His relationship with Dutch is the defining relationship of his life, for better and worse. Dutch gave him purpose and family, but also manipulated him and used him for decades. Breaking free from that isn't just about leaving the gang. It's about dismantling his entire identity and rebuilding it from scratch. The death of Isaac is the original sin he can never atone for. It proves, in his mind, that he's doomed to hurt everyone he loves, that he's his father's son, cursed to repeat the same patterns of abandonment and failure. And then, the TB diagnosis forces him to confront all of this while also confronting his own mortality. He has to reckon with his life, find meaning in it, and try to leave something good behind before it's too late. What we're watching isn't a bad man becoming good, it's a lost man finally finding himself. And the tragedy is that he finds himself right before he dies. Part 10. If Arthur had therapy. Alright, so here's a fun question. What if Arthur Morgan lived in a time where therapy existed? What if he could actually get professional help for all of this? Well, first off, he'd need trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT for the PTSD symptoms, help processing all that violence and loss he's experienced over the years, teaching him coping mechanisms that don't involve drinking or violence. He'd benefit massively from narrative therapy. That's where you literally reconstruct your life story in a way that's more helpful. Arthur's current narrative is, I'm a bad person who's done terrible things and I'm worthless. A therapist would help him build a more nuanced story, acknowledge the harm he's done while also recognizing the complexity of his situation and his capacity for change. Grief counseling specifically around Isaac would be huge. That's unresolved grief mixed with guilt and shame, and it's poisoning everything else in his life. He needs to process that loss properly, separate the grief from the self-hatred. Attachment therapy to help him understand his relationship patterns and learn how to form healthier bonds. To recognize that love doesn't have to be conditional, that his worth isn't tied to his usefulness. And honestly, group therapy with other people dealing with moral injury, hearing that he's not alone in feeling this way, that other people have done things they regret and found ways to live with it. That redemption is possible. But here's the thing, it's 1899. None of this exists. All Arthur has is his journal, his horse, and a handful of people who genuinely care about him, and somehow he still manages to find his way to redemption. Not perfect redemption, not absolution for everything he's done, but enough. Enough to die with some peace. So there you have it, the complete psychological breakdown of Arthur Morgan. He's not just a well-written character, he's a genuinely complex psychological portrait of a man dealing with severe trauma, crushing guilt, and the desperate search for meaning in a life defined by violence. And I think that's why his story hits so hard, because we've all felt, on some level, unworthy. We've all questioned whether our lives matter. We've all carried guilt about things we've done or failed to do. Arthur's struggles are extreme, but they're recognizable, they're human, The genius of Red Dead Redemption 2 is that it doesn't give Arthur an easy out. He doesn't magically heal from his trauma. He doesn't get to undo the harm he's caused. He just gets to try, in the time he has left, to be better. And that has to be enough. Arthur Morgan isn't broken, he's awakening. His pain becomes his purpose. And that transformation, from lost to found, from guilt to grace, that's why we're still talking about him years after the game came out. If you've played through Arthur's story, you know, you felt it. That moment when he tips his hat to John and says thank you. When he watches the sunrise on that mountain. When he finally finds some peace. That's not just good storytelling, that's understanding human psychology at a deep, fundamental level. And it's why Arthur Morgan is, in my opinion, one of the best characters ever created in any medium. Anyway, that's my deep dive. Let me know what you think in the comments. Did I miss anything? Do you see Arthur differently? And seriously, if you haven't played Red Dead 2 yet, what are you waiting for? I'll catch you in the next one.